I could answer that one right now. The system that we have in Calgary is a completely separate system. The stormwater that goes down the street drains does not go to the sewage treatment plant. It goes through storm pipes, through ponds, and goes to Nose Creek, the Elbow River, or the Bow River. We do not have a combined system. We used to have, I think it was prior to the 60s, where there was a combined system, but it is completely separate now. So we do not have a combined system. It does not go to the plants from the street drains. There may be infiltration through pipe joints. There may be inflow through the holes in the manholes when the street ponds.
Well,
but those pipes are not connected to the sewage treatment.
Okay, why Bonnybrook water treatment have flooded right through everything? Every one tank was flooded.
This year, you mean?
No, yes.
Sorry,
Yes, this year, I was there.
it was flooded from the river. That's how Bonnybrook was flooded.
I would like to suggest that we should move on to our third speaker, who, so that the subsequent questions can cover perhaps a rather wider panorama of uncertainties than we've had so far. And to this end, I would like to invite Mr. David Hill, Director of Centres and Institutes and Research Advocacy for the University of Lethbridge. That means he's the guy who has to tie them all together. He's been at it for 40 years. Water and Natural Resources Management in Alberta. Member of the Alberta Water Council for 9 years, from its inception until he went to the University of Lethbridge. He also serves as the Water Policy Co-Chair for the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which I suspect covers a very great deal more than the province of Alberta. So have at it, sir. Have a microphone. I don't need two.
I chose not to live for death by PowerPoint. I want to thank Dennis for the offer and invitation to come and speak with you today. You'll find my remarks to be a lot more general and less focused specifically on Calgary than either David's or Professor Osborne's comments. What I hope to do, though, is provide a little bit of a picture of what perhaps are some of the global best practices in dealing with flood hazards and flood hazard mitigation. And then also begin to compare it to things that are actually happening here in the province and things that are happening at institutions like Alberta's universities. And just to get a couple names off before I forget them, Larry Bentley at U of C and Masaki Hayashi, also at U of C, are both currently doing some research around groundwater surface water interaction in this basin. So those projects, I think, started just earlier this year. What I wanted to begin my comments with is, in most of my career, I've worked very close to agriculture, and I've really come to know somewhat intimately that floods and droughts are just different sides of the same coin. And I think from looking at the hydrographs that both David and Professor Osborne have shown, you can see that we live in an area where flows and water availability is highly variable. And so where now we are talking about a very significant flood event, if we were back in 2001, we would be talking about a very significant drought event, all in the same basin, but with different people impacted, depending on where they live. I was also taking a look at a report that was produced recently in the Netherlands, and I think it also adds some context to what we've been talking about here, and so I'd just like to share you that quote. "It may never be possible to prevent flooding entirely, but people can largely determine for themselves to what extent they want to control the risk." I think that's what we're actually talking about, is what level of risk are we willing to bear. So let me just share with you some of the things that I've been looking at over the last number of weeks and connecting to work that I know that's happening in the province, primarily in the province's universities and research institutions, as well as perhaps in some of the other government agencies that are thinking about these same things. One, I think from an emergency response point of view, in dealing with what's actually happened, we come up really good. In taking a look at what has happened in the EU recently with some flooding, comparing to floods in the United States, I think our emergency response to the event has actually been quite good and quite commendable. What I have found, though, is that there seems to be a real appetite in many parts of society for knowing more about what is possible, for having a better understanding of what the big picture might be. So, taking a look at some of those things, it is now possible today, in the world that we live in, to map floods before they ever happen. And to map them with a very high level of certainty and with an opportunity to begin to really do a lot of what-ifs around these kinds of things. So, what if this flow is only half of a flow we might see in the future? How do we begin to understand those and then visualize them so that we can see what the potential impacts might be and then be able to decide, are these risks we want to mitigate, or are these risks that, because of whether it's the frequency or whatever, that we're willing to live with? So in much of the United States, in programs run by the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, as well as in a large part the Federal Emergency Management Organization or agency in the U.S., FEMA, most of the new work being done on flood mitigation planning is being done with the use of LiDAR technologies to produce very, very accurate maps of where flooding could take place. These technologies are then being married up with a whole host of models. Professor Osborne talked about some. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a broad suite of models that are available really to anybody who wants to use them. There are other models that have been developed by engineering consulting firms. But there is an opportunity now to begin to marry all of these things together so that you can take a look at what the potential impacts of any particular flood might be. Once you get to that point, that also gives you then the opportunity to start to talk about other things that are extremely important. Not only what is the critical infrastructure within a potential flooded area, and where is it, how potentially at risk is it, but we can actually start to look at even human infrastructure. We can look at locations of hospitals, clinics, police stations, all of these types of things to get a better picture of, if something occurs, what are the things we can do. In the state of Washington in 2009, in a coastal river called the Snoqualmie, there was a very, very large flood. What was interesting is they responded fairly well. There was significant damage. I don't recall if there was any loss of life. But what they did after that is they went in and began to kind of reverse engineer the flood, doing all of this kind of study work, using the most up-to-date technologies and models to assist decision makers in understanding what happened. And what we actually found now is that we have the technologies available to us where not only can you map the flood area, but you can take a look at how long it takes water to rise to a certain elevation, how far it goes out, how quickly it recedes, and you can have a much better understanding of the dynamics of floods at various frequencies and levels. Alberta is not completely out of the picture in this, in that we do have some of the world's leading LiDAR experts who are actually at universities in this province. And I think have a lot that they could contribute to what we would want to do going forward. That said, if this knowledge and experience just stays in our institutions and is shared with students and amongst us who like to talk about it, it really doesn't help anybody else. So I think part of the other challenge we have when we look at these issues, and I think this flood is a really good opportunity to see what has happened, is the sun came out, we had the rest of the summer, a lot of people who weren't impacted have gone about their lives, but the conversation is continuing. This has been a very big thing. And I live in Lethbridge. The Oldman River also flooded. It was only half of 2005. But I live way up on the top, and the Oldman River is way down here. And I actually, living in Lethbridge, I don't get that excited about floods. It's going to have to come up an awful long way. But I'm a taxpayer. And my view is that whether the province or the feds are going to, at the end of the day, be able to cover all of these costs in the short interim, we're all in this together, financially and otherwise. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about a word that David Atkinson has used, so that the rest of you know, and it probably doesn't matter to any of you, but we've known each other for almost the whole time David's been in Canada. And it's been a number of years since we saw each other, so this is a good event to get us together. If we talk about resilience, there's a number of pieces to this. There's built infrastructure resilience. How well will these bridges and roads stand up to an event? There's also some resilience around natural infrastructure. And this has already been mentioned. What's happening upstream of Calgary? How are the wetlands? How are the forests? How much impervious surfaces are we creating, which really does drive water to the river quickly. There's a number of pieces around social resilience. We have a professor on our faculty in Lethbridge, Judith Kulig, and Alana, you might remember her name. She did some really interesting work in taking a look at community resilience in Slave Lake right after the wildfire a couple of years ago. I think what we found in our discussions is that as much as we need to be planning for the events that could take place, we also need to be talking about how we plan for the social resilience. How do we equip people in communities so that they can make the best decisions that will give the best outcomes for the people who live in their communities? Also, how do we respond after it so that we can take care of other issues that could come up? Whether they're mental health issues, whether they're healthcare issues, increases in addictions or gambling, all kinds of things that can come about as part of the stress or result of the stress that people find themselves under. There's a whole lot around economic resilience. I take a look at what parts of downtown Calgary were flooded and how many large high-rises were unoccupied for long periods of time, and I'm thinking about business resilience and how we're able to ensure that we don't lose the opportunity to continue to conduct our lives through these kinds of interruptions, are the things we can be doing there. There's a big piece around environmental resilience, and we've also heard about communication and communication resilience. What is not really ironic, but interesting, is from June 3rd to June 6th this year, at the same time these events were happening in Calgary, let me find the name because I